schedule. I'll just immediately turn to the introduction of our panel's moderator, Lisa Coulman, who is a partner with PwC based in Toronto and who is a key member of their entertainment and media industry team and of many industry accomplishments. Lisa is one of the co-editors and presenters of the PwC Global Entertainment and Media Outlook, a report upon which all of us in the industry rely on every year. And so with that, Lisa, I turn the panel over to you.
Thank you. I think key member means I know nothing. So luckily I have a panelist that knows a lot in front of me. So thanks for coming today. I like to call this session Show Me the Money. How do we survive? It's always a good acronym. What I thought we would do first is I'll introduce the panelists very quickly. As they all said to me, people are very savvy. You've already read our bios, so don't just read the bios. It will be too boring. So what I thought I would do is I'll quickly introduce each person, and then I'm going to give them an icebreaker. I'm going to give them a question so that they can make some fun out of introducing themselves. So to my immediate left, I've got Marty, and then I've got Margot, and then Frank, and then Brian and Richie at the very end. So what I want to do is I'm going to let each one of them spend, I was going to say a couple of seconds, but that's not very fair. A couple of minutes introducing themselves. I'd like you to focus on what you do from a day job and where you traditionally would go to get money in a production mode. Or Frank, in your case, you could talk about how you give money and where you give money as the banker. We're going to make fun of the bankers today, I'm sure. But the icebreaker I'd like you to do is, before you talk about yourselves and what you do for a day job, when, not to be negative, but you know, when you die and they're doing your funeral synopsis, what are they going to say was the one thing that you did that made you famous, whether it was embarrassing or not? Wow. So I will be read. Oh, sure, at the far end.
Oh man.
Mr. Richie, you just took the second flight in from Toronto.
I have a long way to go before that funeral, so I got a lot to do still, I think. But we're doing the intros first, the formal things first, or just the question?
What did you do that made you famous?
What did I do? So I'm 9 years old in a casket. I think what I'd like to have been known for is somebody who committed 100% to their ideals, even if it meant going to the gutter.
So what do you do for a day job?
Day job?
Now that you've gone to where you would have wanted to be.
You know, okay, so just a small anecdote. I was in an airport in Algeria a few years ago at a film festival, and we had to fill out our occupation and this little slip to get in the country, and I was sitting beside somebody, and she was an aspiring filmmaker, and it said occupation, and I put film director, and she's like, what do you mean film director? Well, I'm a director of film here at the festival. She goes, do you have a card that says you're a film director? No. Is there like a license? No, not at all. I just say that I am, and I am. You can do it too. So that's my day job. I just say I'm a film director. People seem to believe it, and then I end up doing it.
Perfect. Brian?
Gee, what am I going to be remembered for? Bad sense of humor, I think. With my day job, it's interesting you asked that, because my mother-in-law once asked me, you know, when are you going to get a job? And I said, I have a job, it just doesn't pay all the time. And I think that's what producing really is. So that's basically, you know, I've done many things in my life in producing. I've run a film agency. I've worked for film finances way back, doing completion guarantees. I've worked for distribution. And now I'm trying to get my golf handicap down. And in between, my wife does all the work, and I just try and pretend I'm financing movies. So that's what I'm doing.
And as you can tell from Brian's accent, he has come to us from Australia, so has a good perspective of what's happening in the Aussie world. as we often get compared between Australia and Canada from a film entertainment perspective. So he's going to give us some good insights on what's working, what's not in Australia. The banker.
Banker, yes, it's funny. So my day job is, yes, I work at a bank and we finance film and TV productions. And funny enough, most people, especially in this industry, know me from sort of the production finance business affairs world, because I've worked at the ONBC doing tax incentives, and then at a broadcaster doing their production finance, now at the bank. But I'm actually a trained professional dancer. I can cut a mean rug. I'd like to be remembered for my. So my go-to for this panel is when in doubt, jazz hands. Break out jazz hands. Yeah.
I don't know how to follow that.
You're going to do a dance?
Yeah.
I'm Margot. My day job is VP of Business Affairs at Bron Studios in Vancouver and Media House Capital, which is a gap financing entity out of Vancouver. Funeral. I mean, I'm from Newfoundland, so drinking.
I want that.
Yeah, so there's some good stories you're not going to share with us.
Yes.
Okay, okay.
I'm from Winnipeg, so I can hardly drink. So I think I would take yours. No, the good thing about having this panel today is my answer about what people would celebrate. If I were ever to die, which I can't imagine happening, is that I relieved us all of the burden of trying to decide which is the genies and which is the Geminis. So that's my big thing. But before this past weekend, changed the entire landscape of Canadian film and television. I got a movie made that had languished in LA for 5 years without any financing, without being able to attract any financing, and was able to find the money. So show me the money. I was able to find the money that was willing to support that movie at the $20 million budget that the director felt he needed to get it made, and that was Hotel Rwanda. So I don't, no. So I'm done. I don't have to. I'm going to go golf with Brian, and because there's nothing else. I'm left. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. I'll give you my embarrassing moment. It was on Sunday with Jiminy Glick. I was interviewed by Jiminy Glick, aka Martin Short. And if you've ever been interviewed by Martin Short and you're the accountant, we were there representing the ballots. You don't know what Jiminy Glick is going to ask you, and he's not going to ask you anything about being an accountant. So the questions he asked me were totally off the cuff, and I figured I was going to be sliced as they did the show, but sadly, most of my clip made it to the show. So my family has it all taped and are continued to say, "Oh my God, you've gone viral." Hopefully it will die tomorrow. But so great introduction. I guess the first area we wanted to start was just to understand where you're getting money today, and would be great as you talk about that. What are the things that you're finding are challenging from where you get the money today versus we still have opportunities with the money we get today? As the guys introduced themselves across the panel, you could see that there's a good cross mix of people that have raised money using the traditional incentive programs, and then people that have raised money through the non-traditional, I shouldn't say non-traditional, yet up-and-coming models, through the equity models, the bank financing, or going out and asking friends and family, or there is one person on this group that can talk about crowdsourcing, getting the money that way. So what are some of the new ways that are out there, and how we're trying to get money? So I'll start randomly in the middle. How about Margot? Do you want to start with?
This is going to be me.
Well, obviously, we have a gap financing fund, so I go there first to myself. And
And do you just want to define, just in case someone doesn't know what gap financing is, I'm going to try and stop everyone with acronyms and stuff like that.
well, we're a debt lender, so we take a first position, recruitment position in film. We're a larger gap lender than most in the sense that we can do up to 35% of a budget, whereas most of your gap is around 15 to 20%. And we also went against pre-sales and tax credits. So, and we have a fund called the Crystal Wealth Strategic Yield Media Fund that backs our lending. So, our models at Bron Studios are gap. We have a lot of access to private equity. We do a lot of stuff out of New York. We do a lot of travel there to meet with equity there. Tax credits, obviously, we take advantage of our BC incentives. Post-production deals, especially in LA now, are becoming really large, and music publishing. We do a lot of music publishing deals as well.
Which is to say that you take music publishing rights and put up cash for them.
Well, we go to either Cutting Edge or Song Music Publishing,
Yeah.
and they do that.
Right.
Yeah, so they acquire the music publishing rights of our film for usually about $75,000 to $150,000, depending on the budget.
Richie, do you want to talk a little bit about your film?
Sure. The film that kind of I guess the reason I was asked to be on this was because I'm finishing a film. It's called Siddharth. It's a Hindi language film. The first film I made was also a Hindi language film. Was partly Hindi and partly English, called Amal, and that was financed by kind of the usual suspects in Canada and Ontario, with telefilm and tax credits and pre-sales and gap and all that kind of stuff. All the good stuff. And I found that experience was a great experience, especially with my first feature film. But after coming back from India, and most of our production was in India. I mean, we had the requisite kind of one day. I think it was one day, David, in Ontario. But coming back from India, I realized that there were certain handicaps we had because of the system. And those handicaps were we had to bring X amount of Canadians with us. Again, everything turned out well in that film, but it ended up being a little bit more cumbersome than I would have liked it to be as a process. On top of that, for this particular film, it was completely Hindi language, and it required Indian actors across the board. We couldn't have the requisite Canadian citizen and one of the first top two leads. So it wouldn't have worked for the story. So I kind of sat down with my producers and we came up with a plan to do it completely privately because it would never be considered quote unquote Canadian citizen or Canadian film. So we came up with a plan to access hard money. And the way, just for the broad strokes, the way it works is we broke it down to what are our production costs, what are our post costs, and we did one at a time. Because I was so convinced, maybe stupidly, that if people saw the footage and saw the film, we would be able to raise the rest. So we did literally compartmentalize. What I'm talking about generally is almost a one-off. Like if you have an urge to do something so badly and you just need to get it out of your system, this is a way to do that. It's not industrial, the practices.
Did you raise money in India?
No.
No investors from India?
No investors in India. I found, my personal experience working with in potential Indian money is that it can drop out at any moment with no notice.
That is all.
And I'm not a big fan. And you're nodding your head.
So, Marty, what about you from
Well,
how do you finance productions?
Well, you say, show me the money. But I kind of look at it the other way, which is, give the people what they want. And the people are the people which money. So when we looked at Hotel One, we didn't say, this is such a great movie, everyone will want to see this movie, or everyone will want to buy this movie, or everyone will want to invest in this movie. We said, you know what, there's a new organization in South Africa that is the Industrial Development Corporation that normally invests in mining interests, but have now just thought about investing in films. And if they were ever to invest in a film, this is the film they should invest in. A story of, it's a relatively upbeat story about a terrible tragedy that took place in Africa, but one that, you know, is reflective of a sense of hope for humanity. And so, I knew them because they had invested in a previous movie of mine, which was the second movie they had ever invested in. It was also an African story. And called them and took them this project. And they fell in love with it immediately. Not because it was a great movie, which it was, but not because it was a great director, necessarily not because it had great stars in it, but because it was a movie that fit squarely within their mandate. You know, it's like finding advertisers. It's like anything. You know, you've got something. You've got to find who your audience is. And so they were able to put up a third of the budget, and they did it quite quickly. And an equity fund in England put up another third of the budget. And so, and then we had to figure out how to make the movie qualify both as British and South African. And because there were a number of Americans in the movie, we couldn't make it a Canadian, South African, British co-production. And so even though I was producing it, I made it a British, Italian, South African co-production, because that was the only country that actually had treaties with both of the other countries. And so we went and found a distributor in Italy who really loved the project, but said, you know, in order to relate to this project, we need an actor, you know, some other creative elements in the movie. And they said, is there a role for an actor? Absolutely, you know. We found the actor that they wanted was perfect, and they said, you know, which role could he play? And I said, well, what role would you like him to play? And they said, well, is there a priest in the movie? And I said, yes, there's a priest. I called Terry George, our writer, and said, you know, we need a priest in the movie. And he said, that's okay, there's a priest in the next draft. And I said, great, okay, the priest in the next draft. And they said, terrific, well, we'll get him to do the priest role. Send me the next draft. And so I sent him the next draft. And everything was going great. And Francesco, our Italian distributor, called me the next day. He said, oh, we have a problem. And I said, well, what's the problem? Everything's fine. So I have the next draft. I said, no, it's great. And he said, there's no priest. I said, how can there be no priest? There is a priest in the next draft. Anyway, I had to call Terry back and say, Terry, there's no priest in the next draft. He said, no, I'm working on it. I said, I need the pages today. Anyway, he wrote the pages for the priest and we sent it to Italy, and he loved the pages. And we got the priest there, and it was pouring rain, and he shot for 3 days in the rain and got the flu. And he's in the movie for about 6 seconds. But the point is that we gave them what they wanted. So when I look at projects now, I look at, you know, if you think, where can we go to get money? The question is, what are you delivering those people that you hope will give you money? Is there a star from their country that you can put in the movie that will make the movie more valuable to them? You know, is there a French sale? Is there a German sale? Are there actors that, you know, are there locations? Are there sets? Is there a storyline that appeals to their market that makes your project in any way valuable to them because of what it is? And so many people don't even think about that, you know? That's the first thing.
Yeah, so that's a great theme, and maybe we'll pick that up as we go to the two other members of the panel that we haven't talked to. But just as, you know, one of the biggest challenges you have if you're looking for financing outside of the traditional models is what things are going to work as you have to go into a pitch, for example, to the bank. So, so Frank, if you can maybe give us a quick overview of what types of financing your bank does, but I think more importantly, can you focus on what are things that you find are successful when someone comes and does a pitch to you versus give us one good story of one that was a disaster.
Okay, well, just to, you know, I guess maybe tag on to what Marty was saying, you know, when our group, I mean, we finance about 500 financings a year. We've in total have been over, you know, 55 100 deals we've seen throughout our group, so we've seen pretty much it all. To answer your question directly, we do like the usual suspects, telefilm, tax credits. We've worked with these partners, we know them. We're comfortable working and financing those sources of financing. But when you get into situations like Marty and there are private financiers and stuff, we do that as well. There's a little bit more due diligence. So when you come to us with a fully Indian show with an Indian investor, you have to bring all the information about where the sources of financing are and exactly what interim lending needs you need from us, from the bank. So the clearer you are in that regard, then the easier it is to get to, a bank deal.
Do you have a good story of what not to do?
I'm trying to think. I don't know if I've got a bad story. Just to sort of maybe steer that into another sort of creative financing sources too. We've seen deals where sponsorship was a heavy role. There was a big deal where it was a sort of an army-centric film, and the army was all over it. So they gave them unfettered access to aircraft carriers and tanks and all that sort of stuff. So it significantly impacted the budget, right? Which is very sort of similar to Marty. If you've got partners that are really giving them what they want, where this film is what they wanted, it was a good it helped the bottom line. Another one too, I think just recently, and we were not particularly involved in it, but in BC, Kokanee beer, 100% financed a film, right? And it's not it's more to cater to, I think, their market share and their sort of who they buys their beer, whatever. And so I'm interested to see how that pans out, because they're not alone in trying that. I think too, an airline did recently a documentary about airline, 100% financed their own documentary. So I think there's other opportunities and other revenue streams out there too. So I'm not sure if I gave you what you were looking for, but yeah.
Now, Brian, I'd be interested in your perspective on what in the past as a producer where you would look for money and how you see that morphing in Australia.
Well, in Australia, we had a very good tax incentive in the 1980s that started off being 150% tax deduction going in and a 50% holiday on profit, which basically meant that a private investor was at risk going in at maybe 10%. The problem that started to arise is, and it happens anywhere we have such a great incentive, is an awful lot of bad films get made. And the second thing is that the bankers and lawyers come in and exploit it and charge a lot of fees and take all that going through. And it's all about this really selling a tax product to private investors. Private investors think that's wonderful until they actually see no money back. And they then reconsider and think, well, I had to pay my taxes, which at that time I think was about 50 cents on the dollar. I would have had 50 cents left to buy a cup of coffee. This way I get nothing. So government started winding it back because of the abuses. And by 1990, it had been reduced to 100%, which was still okay. And the Film Finance Corporation, which is a bit like Telefilm Canada, was created to be a bank that would co-finance films with producers. That worked okay right through the 90s into the early 2000s. But what started to happen was private sector finance totally dried up. And it was basically the financing plan for an Australian film, and it still is to a certain degree, which is you have the government agency, you will have a state agency like a province, you'll have a local distributor, and then you're looking at some overseas sales. What has changed in Australia is that we've now moved to what you've had for a while, to what we call a producer offset, which is a tax credit, which for a feature film is 40%. And it's 40% across the board. It's not 40% just on labour, it's on the whole cost. So on the significant Australian spend, you'll get 40% back on that. So now when we do a finance plan, we basically, that 40%, I'll use round figures, if you got a $10 million movie, you don't get a full 40% of it because there's always exclusions, but say you get around 35%, so you get 3.5 million there. You go to our equivalent of Telefilm at Screen Australia, and they will give up to a max of 2.5 million, but let's say that's 2 million, you're at 5.5 million, you'll get about 500,000 out of a state organisation, so there's your 6 million. Here's the trick, it's the 4 million that's left. How do you get that? And in Australia, with our distributors, you know, they do take on Australian films, and I'm just involved with a film to do here in Canada, and I'm totally shocked at your distribution here and how little they really pay, and it's really a cut through to whatever the TV sale is. But the other shock that I got too is that when they said to me, well look, your film will be released on 10 or 15 screens, which I go, well, no wonder the box office is down, because that's the attitude, you're never going to have a box office. In Australia, even if you're doing an art house film, you will get a 30 or 40 screen release. A film like Red Dog, which some of you may have heard of, but it was released on 268 screens in Australia, so it was just like a major studio. And that film had a pretty hefty P&A of around 3.5 million, and it did 22 million box office. So there's a difference for our distribution as to what they'll contribute. The big thing that's happened to all of us, the independents, is that the pre-sale market has collapsed on us. It's very hard to get pre-sales for the kind of films we make. If you're making a film, like for instance was done last year, about a shark in a supermarket called Bait 3D, you can pre-sell that into quite a few markets. So they got quite a few pre-sales now. But if you're doing what I call a drawing room drama, which is what a lot of independent films are, it's very hard to get the pre-sales unless you have a major star in the film. So how do you find that last 30%? I've just heard here with Media Capital, I can get 25%. I'd like to know all the rules and regulations, all the criteria that go with it. But that's a great start. Our great difficulty is how do we make up that gap? In the past, you know, banks did gap around 10, 15%. That doesn't happen as much anymore. It may, but it doesn't happen that much.
Yeah, well, a lot of banks I think don't do that. Actually, we actually are in the gap lending space as a bank, which is pretty, I think, unique for most Canadian banks. But yeah, we're doing gap, but you're right, it's difficult in other places.
So now you're trying to get private sector finance, and how do you get that?
Yeah.
I don't know about here in Canada, but in Australia, our industry stinks to investors. They think we are the complete carpetbaggers of wherever, because they have a memory back to the 80s when there was a lot of money went in and nobody made any money out of it. So we're trying to re-educate the marketplace in that film, you know, is not full of carpetbaggers anymore, and that what the producer offset gives you is it's basically an arbitrage. So something that costs $1 in real terms to make is only actually costing 60 cents because I'm getting a 40% rebate back. That starts to become quite interesting for investors, because if you look at investors and see how they invest in things, there may be stocks and shares in it, but really what we deal in is venture capital. And so when you consider what we have with a 40% rebate, that's really interesting to venture capitalists because they're getting something at a cheaper price. The thing now is for us in Australia, the big push is how do we now monetize that? How do we get investors to start looking at that? And that's a thing that is slowly starting to happen in Australia. We're having, as no doubt you're having here, a massive mining boom. And those guys have a lot of money and are looking to invest in other things. And they sort of understand the film industry as venture capital, that you've got to dig a lot of holes until you find something. And they know that it's totally risk money, and they also know they could lose their money on it. But the other thing too is what they want to know is that if it does work, they're going to see a big share of it. And again, that comes down to how you do your finance plan and where you position those investors. And so it gets back to the same thing as with media capital, which is they need to come out first. So what you need to have is, if you've got agencies in there, they're going to have to subordinate behind that. agencies come and go in that. Agencies have their own KPIs where they have to get a certain amount of recruitment and all of that. But if you want to have an industry that has private sector money in it, then the agencies are part of that environment to make it help happen, and they're going to have to subordinate. And that has happened in Australia with Screen Australia and prior to that with the FFC, whereby they will subordinate behind private sector money because they understand the value of private sector money. That it is it's like bank money, or banks will always come out first, and that's where you have to put the investor. And that's the thing you have to start looking at is how do you build that finance plan, and how do you convince them that 30% they're going to get that 30% back and make money on it. Obviously, having sales estimates is a good way of doing that. Sales estimates, you have from your sales agent the highs and lows. What you have to be careful with, and again, I used to see this when I was running the Film Finance Corporation, how many finance plans came in, and the budget totally exceeded what the sales figures were ever going to deliver. And that doesn't make sense. Now, for an agency, you go with it because our remit is to make films and support making films. But for the private sector, if you're coming in and raising 3 or 4 million, and the sales estimates initially for the film on a lower, say on 1.5, and on a higher 3 million, they're not going to come in. So you have to tailor your budget accordingly, or get your sales estimates up. But that's what you have to look at. They're the things that a private investor is going to look at.
So that was a good segue into our next topic. So, talking about incentive programs, we continue to have incredible incentive programs here in Canada, but there is risk with those incentive programs. As governments change, as we evolve away from the traditional models, the BDUs and things like that feed those incentive programs. There's risk that the lovely access we have to them are going to start to diminish. So really what we wanted to talk about at the tail end of this conversation was what do we do, how do we help you in the audience start to realize that yes, everyone here has talked about the fact that there are other sources of capital to finance a production, whether it's the gap that you're looking at between your incentive and your full budget, or you're doing full financing. You're not even going to the incentive programs. So, and so Brian did a good summary of what's happening in Australia, which is exactly what we're seeing here in Canada as we evolve into the more business. I'll call it we always were in the business environment, but it's even becoming more important that we have that sophistication around how to run a business. It used to be if you had a really good movie and you had great content and it was Canadian and it was about XYZ city within Canada that rarely got covered, that you could have gotten funding. It's now moving towards where you have to have something that's compelling and ultimately sellable. So I'm going to open up a question to the panel around what, as we move into this more, into the need to be able to get money from other sources, what are things that, give the audience 2 tips that they've really got to focus on to help them be successful when they're going to a non-traditional place, whether it's a bank or your friends or the internet to get money.
So tip 1 is budgets are coming down. Budgets are going down everywhere on the planet. So a movie, I did these movies with David Cronenberg. 10 years ago we did Spider, which had a budget of $20 million, which was easily financeable. And as we were in closing and in pre-production with one of our investors, with money from one of our investors, the German New Year market crashed, and the Japanese economy stalled, and the sale value of the movie went from $20 million to $14 million to $12 million to $8 million over the period of about 10 weeks. Between Cannes, when everyone was celebrating the fact that we had it financed, to June, the late end of June when we started shooting it, its value in the world had collapsed in half. This movie was like fine to Richie. we had to accommodate that by grinding our budget down while we were closing the financing. It's a movie that probably wouldn't, should have just collapsed and burned and not been made, but we managed to get made for less than half of what we thought it should have cost.
You have flexibility in your costs, is that the?
Yeah, well, and the big place there's flexibility right now is in actors' salaries, because we used to say a couple of years ago, make sure you've got $3 million above the line so you can pay your lead $1 million and your second lead $750. And you know what? Nothing's getting made anymore. There's, unless you're wearing a cape or, carrying a gun and running away from a fireball, the movie's not getting made. So there's a lot of people who went to acting school, who are looking for parts, who are, and they're not in an HBO series yet, so they need a job. And it's shocking how, I would say the next thing is, get stars. Go to stars, and get your movie in front of real actors. That's who people are buying in the world, and they're actually reading. If you can make a $2.5 million movie. Look at Beginners, is a movie that was made for, by a Canadian, Miranda Pontier, and for, under $2 million, around $2 million, under $2 million. And, Chris Plummer won his Academy Award for it. And it's Ewan McGregor and Christopher Plummer, and it's a phenomenal movie. It did well all over the world. It didn't cost anything at all to make. And, this is, you're there, you make a movie that has a budget that fits the world, even though it's a drama, and, most people say don't make a drama, but it's a, drama with a twist, because it's about an older man and his, and his son and their relationship. It got made, and obviously, it's a great film, but it had assets in it, and that's just absolutely what you need. And I see too many projects, people with their movies, and they've got they've got their list of hoped for cast, and you look at them and go, who's that guy? Oh, he was in the series about so and so. Who's that woman? Oh, she was, the third Bron girl that died. And you kind of go, well, this is not a package. Go upstairs, find the cast, get the project to them. Don't assume you can't get cast in your movie because people are looking for projects.
Yeah. Well, I would say sales estimates are key, and with that, obviously, foreign sales agents, fostering relationships with these people.
And giving them cast.
And they will tell you what the value is. Like, their job
With cast.
is to show you.
Not for it. Did I mention cast?
Yes. Their job is to tell you what the value of your package is. And if they're telling you the value of your package internationally is $1 million, then your budget better be $750, or you change the value of your package. So
How?
cash.
Okay.
So, I would say, and also that in Canada, understanding that you have to make internationally viable films. We don't have an industry, a population to support a movie that only has value in Canada. So, understanding the foreign market, fostering relationships with foreign sales agents would be my number one. And that's our collateral. Like, that's the first thing I look at.
I think the other thing when we did our pre-call that I remember from you, Margot, was also know your audience. You were very, very profound on that as you're making a pitch to someone in the whole 360 process.
Yeah, because your pitch to your sales agent is not the pitch you're going to give me as a gap lender, right? So lookbooks are great, and I love looking at them. But if you just give me a lookbook and a script, I'm going to tell you to come back when you have estimates, a finance plan, and a budget. So, for me, I get a lot of lookbooks and stuff, but that's not what, as a lender, is not my priority to receive. It's what's my collateral, where is it, what's it worth? So that's really important. And I'm sure the same with you. If you just get creative elements, it's great, it's exciting, everyone likes a great script, but I'm a fund, so I need you to show me what your value of your project is, and that comes from the foreign sales estimates, primarily.
Well, and just to jump on what Marco said, as a non-incentive lending deal, high level, it needs to be a good deal, right? So it's a business. It's a business, right? So if you have a good sales agent, you have your sales estimates, and bottom line, the numbers make sense, that's what's going to get green
Yeah,
light.
treat it as a business.
Deal.
Once you get, your creative elements in place, then it becomes a business proposition and a value add. So what value are you bringing? What's the business plan? So, you have to treat it like every movie's a startup and, how are you getting money? What's the business plan, really?
Yep.
Richie, I'll jump to you at the end. Two tips on
Yeah,
raising money outside of the traditional models.
The one, I couldn't agree more with everything I've heard, especially the cast thing. Who was that? Who said that?
Someone down here. But I should say director too. Very important.
Yeah.
Because they get you.
Unless
Because they get you the
They get
cast.
you
Get a cast. But there's something else you need to get the cast, and that is a script. And at the risk of potentially sounding arrogant, you need a really damn good one. And I hate to say this, but I feel like with all the stuff we're talking about, again, we're talking about film and television projects in countries that rely heavily on subsidies, and I always feel like the person in the creative process that gets slighted, and I will be the first to say this is part of the reality, is the screenwriter. Because it is very difficult to foster a really amazing project because you have no money to do so. So if you can somehow get a really good script, and in my case, I don't know if I have them, but I just do them myself, and I try really hard to do them. And I'm talking about spending years on them. And when they reach a point where I feel that they are the best they can possibly be, that's when I can go out into the market and try and get cast attached. But let's say I have a project, again, and I don't have the potential to get, or the creative reason to get a big name cast. How do I get the money? If it's a purely idea-based script and it's certain risks attached, you're not going to get big names attached. That's the other thing was said, was keep your costs low. Because what I've started to do now is look at certain projects, again, very particularly in India, and I've started figuring out ways to execute the projects with 1/10 the budget that what we had before. I mean, what you were saying about Spider going from 20 to 8, that's huge for an industrial project. But I think it's actually still pretty generous today.
Well, this was 10 years ago.
10 years ago, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we're talking about slashing it to the point where
Today, $8 million art movies are not being made.
that's that gap
Now
spot
they're-
now, which doesn't exist.
Yeah.
8-12
Right.
is a bad place.
Yeah.
So
And it used to be the perfect place.
Yeah, now it's a bad place.
And now it doesn't exist anymore.
right. So keeping your costs so low that you can go, like, again, in the case of this film, we went to private investors completely outside the system. So how do you lure them in? And I'm not saying lure like a snake. I'm saying lure as in how do you make this attractive? Yes. And that is to keep the cost so low that they see they're getting a product that is of such high value and high quality that you will be able to sell it afterwards. And part and parcel with that is that you own it as a result. So you can start giving pieces of the pie away, including pieces of the pie to cast. So there's, for me, like what I'm figuring out right now is if we're talking about private money, we're talking about money completely outside of the system. Like in a way not going to an institute. Because I feel like what we're talking about is still benefited by getting a telefilm, getting in Australia, getting the government to come on board. If you have nothing, if you're going completely rogue in a way, you have to keep your costs super low, you have to have the best script you possibly can, and you have to be able to own the whole thing afterwards.
It's got to be a good deal.
Yeah.
It's gotta be a good deal.
Look,
2 years ago.
here's the skinny for all of you who are producers. See, it's completely fucked because you're not earning any money. You're not making any money. And is that a business we want to be in? You can be passionate about it and all of that, but you're not going to be able to pay a mortgage. Because that's what's happened is that you have to have skin in the game, so it means you get no fees. You're having to drive the budgets right down. You're asking all the crew to work at scale. You're getting your actors to work at scale. And now you're going to go out into distribution. Well, distributors not reducing his amount. They're still going to charge 30 to 35%. The exhibitors will still take their 50 to 60% of the box office. And that's the problem is that when you look at, I did an analysis of Hollywood movies over a 4-year period, and the return to the actual negative cost of those films is only in around 13 or 14%. because the name of the game is distribution. The studios make their money on distribution and all those distribution pipelines. They don't actually make it on production. I mean, they do when you have a Avatar or something like that. But generally speaking, the margin is not that great on there. So if you think you're an individual doing it, how are you going to see the money? And we all hear about the great success. Somebody made a film for $1 million, and it sold to Fox for $6 million. So you think, oh, they made a profit of $5 million. No, they didn't, because Fox may have paid $6, but now they have to bump up the film that was made for next to nothing, and for $1 million, and enhance the music and enhance the sound. And suddenly that's all put against that $6 million. So now that $6 million comes down to $4 million, or $3 million. And what are they going to see after that? You know, are you going to see more money after that? And in turn, you have investors. You've said to the investor, okay, we'll split 50-50. So now, out of that $3 million, they're going to want to get their $1 million back to start with. So now you're left with $2 million, you're splitting 50-50, so they get $1 million, you're left with $1 million. Well, that's great. But you can see how that pie is cut down. You're not getting that much out of it. And that's the big problem for us in feature film. That's why television is more lucrative. And if you have a business plan, you better have television in there. I'm an old school guy, I only do features, but that's the difficulty we have. It's a very difficult business to make money, and even if you get a breakout movie, you're seeing far less than maybe you should be seeing.
This is a pep rally, by the way.
So maybe we'll take questions. Who has the first question from the floor? You've got some good. Can you? Yeah, you have the mic so we can hear it. Thank you.
Sorry. Not working. Hello. I could just yell. I'm Brad Coulman. I'm actually a distribution executive in the business for some time, so I appreciate what Bron has to say. Thank you. Question actually just for Margot. From Bron's perspective, what is the discount that you're lending against on the international estimates these days? So if someone says it's worth $1 million, you're loaning half?
Yeah, we
of
require
that
2-to-1 coverage. Yeah.
And then
against
what's
the
your budget sweet spot for Bron Studios?
For Media House. Media House, yes.
Yeah.
Media House capital, so we can lend up to 35% of the budget. We try not to do any loans that are less than
But up to
$750.
how much money?
Up
$5
to-
million, $10 million?
Right now on this fund right now, which is a feature film fund, the largest loan we've done to date is 3.5.
Okay.
We're in the process right now of developing a television fund and a second feature film fund, which will be larger, which can lend up to about 40%, and we would do about $5 million
Thanks.
per.
So that's 3.5%, that's all mezzanine, or
35. At 35.
3.5 million?
Yeah, no, it's all first position gap.
And what about this, that's on top of the collateralized lending? Or do you do
Yeah,
collateralized
no, we
lending?
do
Senior debt?
we do pre-sales.
Yes.
We usually discount about 85% and lend pre-sales, and tax credits. We obviously are not in the Canadian game because our money is too expensive, and the banks have that kind of wrapped up. But we do tax credits mostly in the States, and looking at an offset loan right now in Australia.
Any other questions for the panelists? Yes. Can we ask you to use the mic?
Sure. Sorry, this one's totally just for my information. That 40% tax credit, that's an all spend, and does it apply to television? What restrictions are there on that?
The 40% in Australia is on feature films, and it's on qualifying Australian production expenditure. In television, we have a 20% offset, so you get 20% in that. The interesting thing for the Australian offset is that if we're making a movie, and I'll take something, traditional sort of Australian thing of a war, Gallipoli, right, of Australian troops being Gallipoli. And so I needed to go and shoot in Turkey for a week to do that. Any crew that I take over, or any equipment I take over into Turkey gets the rebate, even though I'm filming offshore. I can get that. The other interesting thing with the Australian tax incentive is that if I bring Tom Cruise in to do a film and pay him $20 million, I can get 40% of that $20 million. However, the catch is he has to pay taxes in Australia, which he doesn't like doing. But that's how it works.
You know this for a fact. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. If I can have one.
But he did a movie there.
One follow-up to this. Do you think a tax credit system is compatible with some other incentive for private investment? I mean,
I'd like to see that happen in some of the Canadian jurisdictions. I wouldn't like to see any reduction in our tax credits as a result, but do you think those things are compatible if there was some incentive for private money? What would you think it would look like to make it
So
compatible?
I think it would be great. Treasury will never go for it. It's one or the other. If they're going to give you a rebate, they're not also then going to give a tax deduction on the other side of the equation. People
Spend
will
the
try.
money on one side,
Yeah.
why not get the whole
Well,
industry?
because in the end, it's killing the golden goose. And that's what we do in this industry all the time. Because we say we have a tax credit. How can I leverage that? Can I? In fact, I know a way in Canada how I can get a tax deduction or something. But you have to look at that and then turn around and say, is that what you want to do? Because in the end, Treasury will look at it and say, these guys are killing it, and they'll close something down. And that's what happens. And I think as filmmakers, we have to be good citizens. You can't always look at the sharp edge of how can I bleed extra money out of the system, because government in the end shuts it down, and it's happened everywhere. In the UK, Germany, everywhere.
But here's the thing, I know Richie said this was a pep rally, so, you know, a year and a half ago I made a movie called Man on the Train, which involved an Irish musician, a well-known Irish musician. And we couldn't, you know, between the tax incentives and our pre-sales and our Irish tax incentives, it was an Irish-Canadian co-production, we were in that place where we had about 65 or 70% of the budget, and there was no place else to go unless we went other pre-sales, which was very hard to do, impossible to do. And so it really was not feasible to close the finance in this movie unless we had some non-traditional money. And what did we find? We found a millionaire Irish-American music nut. Okay, he made millions of dollars in the music promotion business. He, you know, was a bit of a what do they call them? I guess in Montreal they call them construction people, but he was kind of organized crime. And I don't think he was involved in the construction business, but he did. He drove a couple Harleys. He had a couple henchmen, and he did promise to break my legs if he didn't get his money back. My leg's still here, but he only did that a couple times. Most of the time, he was really very pleasant. But the point is, so what do we have to sell him? What do we have to sell him? Because we had all this tax incentive money that had, you know, to recoup in its position. But what we had to sell him was foreign access to foreign markets. So we pre-sold the United States to him, and this is something we can do because gap lenders assume the United States is worth nothing because you're either going to, because it's a binary proposition. You either sell it or you won't sell it. So they don't discount it and say, well, you should probably sell it for $1 million. We'll assume you'll get $350 for it because that's a pretty good rock bottom price. They will, isn't that right? If you're a gap lender, you look at the U.S. and say 0 because that's, you know, almost certainly what you're going to get unless you get a bit more. So unless you're these guys, I'm telling you, I'm just going to give you a card. This is too good to be true.
Relending, if WMECA or UTA are involved and they provide you with something.
It depends on your sales agent.
Yeah,
Depends on the sales agent.
So we took the U.S.
too.
This was
Yeah.
better than banking. Better than banking. We took the U.S. and we sold it to this crazy motorcycle riding, music loving Irish American millionaire who wrote us a check for close to $1 million. And that was, so taking a project where there was a potential, you know, value and finding the person for whom that value was significant. And he wanted to come set, and he wanted to hang out with musicians, and he wanted to be involved in the movie. And you know what? That was valuable to him. So again, you know, horses for courses, finding the right assets in your package.
It's called
to
money
deliver
laundering.
to investors.
Yeah.
Sorry?
It's called money laundering.
And be ready to give away. Just remember when this goes viral, our names are Bob, Billy.
Yeah.
And be prepared to give away a lot of EP credits.
Look, I agree with Martin, is that we have a project we're doing in Australia that's a historical project about an Austrian Jewish family that escaped after the Anschluss in '38 and ended up in Australia. And he was a musician, a viola player, and he wanted to be in the Australian Broadcasting Corporation symphony orchestra, which he could do, except the union wouldn't let him in because he was classified as a Nazi because of Austria and Germany being together. And he started a costume jewelry business and did all of that, and then got shut down at the beginning of the war when all non-essential manufacturing was stopped. But he was also an inventor, and he ended up inventing a zip for the military because normal zips didn't work when they were in the mud and dust and everything. And he invented this zip and made a lot of money out of it, and then started his factory again to manufacture, and then he started doing other stuff for the war effort and became quite wealthy. And at the end of the war, he started a non-for-profit organization called Musica Viva, which was to bring chamber orchestras to people. And at that time in Australia, probably similar to Canada, it was pretty barren culturally. And so that was the beginning of it. And then along the way in the 80s, they started taking classical music into all the schools, and it's now the biggest program in schools in Australia. In fact, Musica Viva is the largest chamber orchestra company in the world. Now you go, that's great, Brian, who the fuck's going to give you money for that? Well, exactly, I'm going to the Jewish community in Australia to get the money because they're going to back it. That's how I know I'm going to finance it. And I'm doing it because my own father was a refugee and a conductor of an orchestra in Ireland. And I'm doing that for those reasons, but that's how I'm raised. That, going into this project, I said, I will never get pre-sales on this unless I get Michael Fassbender or something like that into there. But I know I can get private equity, and that's how I go about doing that one. Because I know going to these guys, it'll never, or a sales agent, it's not going to happen. All the thing I can hope for is that it becomes a shine in the end, that makes him, that's got a value and goes into the festivals and plays out that way. But my investors, I tell them up front, you're not going to see, you're doing this because of philanthropic reasons, and you may see some money back, but you're going into it for philanthropic reasons only.
Well, I think I've been given the stand-up time, so I want to thank each of the panelists today. I think it's a very good I wanted to just wrap up with some of the key things we heard today. One, obviously, cast. The other being have a fungible cost structure so that you can shrink it, expand it as you need to, as you figure out that you're not going to get as much money as you need. The other one that we heard loud and clear was, in order to find financing, understand who would be your audience, who would be most interested, and go and speak to them if it's a cultural community or individuals that have a very hidden wish to participate in something. We do that matching, know who you're matching to and making your pitches to the right audiences. And I'm the accountant, I have to leave the last message for last. It really is important when you do a pitch that you have the creative and the finances, because anyone that's going to give you money is very sophisticated. They understand that you're enthusiastic, that you have great talent, but if you can't show them the money, you've lost the show.
And just as a side note on that, everyone invested in my film is brown.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely true. And